Okay, let's just get right into our first couple of field properties here, and we'll start with field size. So as you can see, we have the data type short text selected under first name, and in our field size it's going to default to 255 characters. That's the default value for short text. Now it's not critical that you do this, but it's good practice to limit this number. And there are a couple of reasons to do this. The first reason is to limit the amount of storage needed for your database. The second is to prevent potential errors. For instance, if someone were to put in 200 characters for a first name, there's a pretty good chance that something went wrong. Maybe they copied and pasted a paragraph instead of just a name or something to that effect. But by limiting this, we can reduce the chances of that happening. The one thing you have to be careful of is that you don't limit it too much. So for instance, we could select a field size of 4 characters here. But for first name, obviously, unless your name is Bob or Joe or Jan, you're not going to be able to fit that in there. And the field size limits will restrict the amount of data that goes in here. So when someone tries to type in a first name, if there are only 4 letters allowed, it's only going to let them put in 4 letters. So a good rule of thumb is between 30 and 50. We'll just be kind of liberal with our space in this case, and we'll do 50 characters. Now where this starts to have more significance is, for instance, if we go to our table offices, and if we wanted to do these by state abbreviations, which is actually a much better idea. This was sort of a lazy move on my part to put the full state name in there. So if we want to change all of these to just the state abbreviation, then we can go back in and we can restrict the number of characters allowed here to 2. So let me show you how to do that. So now we can go in here and we can limit this field size, and when we save that, it's going to bring up this message saying some data may be lost. This is a very important message. It says the size of one of your fields has been changed to a shorter size, right? We took it from 255 characters down to 2. It says if data is lost, validation rules may be violated as a result. Do you want to continue anyway? Now we went back into our table, right, and we changed all of our state names to 2-letter abbreviations. So we're okay to click yes here. Now if we hadn't have gone in and done that ahead of time, then when we changed this, we would lose a lot of that data. So for example, Idaho is 5 letters, and it only allows 2 now in our new formatting. So we would lose that data. So we're okay now though, because we made those changes ahead of time, so we'll click yes. And now when we go back to our datasheet view, if we put in a new record here and we try and type in Colorado, it gives me those error messages. So I can only type in 2 letters, and if I hit enter, it's happy with it. So for now we'll go back to design view. So let's just go through both of our tables and edit the field size for all of our fields. So on the auto number, and again you notice this changes down here with the different data type. So on an auto number it's listed as long integer, and we want to leave it that way so that Access can continue to add unique numbers to our auto number sequence. The next one is city, and the city we can change to 50 characters as well. The state we already changed to 2. Okay, let's look at the field size for the phone number. If we have a US number, even if it included all the numbers, parentheses, spaces, and dashes, it wouldn't be more than 15 characters. We're not going to store that many because we'll have them enter it in a simpler format, which I'll show you in just a little bit. But 15 characters is good for the phone number. Then we can go over to our employees. And again, this is auto number. We're going to leave that as it is. We have first name, we put 50. Last name, we'll put 50 as well. Phone, again for this one, we can change to 15. And our office ID number is a number, we'll leave as long integer. So that's field size. Let's talk about format. The format affects the way that the data is displayed, and it's actually similar to the input mask, which we'll talk about in a bit, which affects how the data is entered. But with the format, if you're selected on number, it actually does give you a drop-down list, and you can choose from one of these if you want. But for the case of our office ID, where this is our foreign key, it just needs to be a long integer. We don't need to do any special formatting to it. So we'll close that. Let's look at our phone number, which is our short text. So in format here, and you'll notice if you try and use the drop down for short text, it's empty. And the reason for that is probably because there are a lot of different codes that you can put in here to modify the format. And I'll show you actually an example of this when we get over to the offices table. But for all of these, we really don't need any formatting, any special formatting. So our last name, our first name, and our auto number are fine the way they are. So let's go look at our table offices. Again, we have our phone number, no need to change that. We have our state. And here's something interesting. This @ symbol means that it's a required field, and that @ symbol actually came over to Access when we imported the spreadsheet from Excel. It's not necessary, and we could actually just delete it. Now, one thing with the state, we want it always to display as uppercase, right? So what we can do here is we can do a greater than symbol. The greater than symbol forces things to be displayed in uppercase, whereas the less than symbol forces them to be displayed in lowercase. And I'll show you what this looks like when we go back to our datasheet view. I have to save it. And again, it's saying you're changing the way formatting is done and the way the data is treated within your table. And if you don't have things set up right, then some information is going to be lost. In this case, we're fine because this isn't going to delete any of our data. So we can click yes. And now when I go here, if I want to change this to lowercase co, it's going to just automatically change it to uppercase. So that's pretty cool. Let's go back. So we will do that for the formatting there. For city, we don't need to do anything, but we do have this @ symbol again, and we're going to just delete that. And then our auto number will leave the same. Real quick though, let's look at what it would do if we had a date in there. Let's go to our employees, and we're going to add in their date of birth. And we're going to make this data type date and time. Now you'll notice it goes straight to our format for our first option. And when we click on this, we get a drop down giving us our options. And probably the most common is just the short date, but you can see you have other choices here as well. But we'll go with the short date for our format. And now when we go to our datasheet view, we're fine with all that. We can go in and put date of births here, and you notice it also gives us a little clickable calendar. But if I start to type in June 24, 1978 and hit enter, notice it formats it in our short date format. Okay, and we can go to Stan, and we can actually use the calendar here and use that to put in his information. So that's how you change the format to date. And again, going back to design view, that covers formatting. Now let's look at our input mask. And the input mask, when we're in time and date, offers us a input mask wizard. And I briefly mentioned this before, but the input mask affects the way that your data is entered. And again, on this we can go to short date, and then it gives you a chance to try entering it in. And you'll see it's setting everything up for us when we go to enter it. So it shows us how we need to put it in. So we can put in October 12th, 1983. And it worked. Okay, we assign the mask that we want to use for it. We try it out to make sure it works. Click next. And then it shows you the actual code. So you could use this code, but the wizard makes it easy for you to essentially access this code and it'll put it in for us. Then we have a placeholder character, and generally speaking you'll just use the dashes. That just shows you, remember back here when we go to try it, that shows you where the spaces are. And you can change this to different characters, but typically you'll use the underscore. And then click next again and you're finished. Click finished, and then see it's entered in the code for the way that we want our date to be entered. Okay, so that's your input mask for your date of birth. Let's go ahead and look at our office ID, and we won't be putting any input masks on the numbers. Let's go with our phone. This is another good one where we can influence the way the text is entered and in fact make it easier to enter. So if we go to here, save our table, and you see we have different options: social security code, zip code, password, date, etc. Obviously we'll be clicking phone number and we can try it, and again you see it basically gives us all the surrounding characters so we know what to expect, and we can just go ahead and type in whatever phone number we want. Okay, and we can see that it works. Click next. Again, we'll leave the placeholder character, and there it's showing our code again. Click next. And then this one is important. How do you want to store the data? Generally speaking, you're going to want to store the data without the symbols in the mask. So when someone's typing their numbers in with this nice input mask showing them how to do it, it's not going to actually store it like this. It's going to store it without all the dashes and everything. And that just makes it cleaner and it takes up less space in your database. Okay, so you click next and finish. So now we have an input mask for our phone number, and let's go take a look how that works. Yep, we'll save it. And now it's applied this input mask. And you can see that the way we originally entered it, or I should say the way I originally entered it, didn't work very well with that mask. So we would actually need to go back into these and finish them up and put the information that we need in here. And this is a really great time to point out that planning out your database from the very beginning before you even have any data is really important, because you can see how even with only 16 entries, what a pain in the butt it is to now go back and copy this. And I mean, in this case, these are fictitious, right? So I could go in and just paste these in here, by double clicking into that field. But obviously all of these people live in different places, so really we'd have to go back and look where Bob Blake lives and hunt down the area code to his phone number if we wanted that information in here, which could be important at some point because we might want to do a search by area code to find all the people who live in Wyoming or Washington or whatever. So that's that's kind of a good lesson. I'll just fill these out real quick so it's complete. Okay, so we'll go back to our design view again. So now we have an input mask for our phone number. Let's go to our last name. We're not going to do an input mask for that because it's pretty straightforward. Same with first name and same with ID. And actually this I would like to say employee ID, because you want to be specific about your field names so that you know what it is exactly. And so we'll save this because I just made that change. Go over to offices again, and let's start down at phone number. We'll do an input mask for this one as well. We'll do the same one. Save it. Yep, we like that one. And next, without the symbols, yes. And finish. And you'll see when we go back to datasheet view again, save it, we're gonna have the same issue here. And again, this isn't a problem because this is just an input mask, but it just looks funny. So, but again, where these are just fictitious numbers anyway, we'll just fill them in. Okay, jumping back to design view. That's that, our state. We don't need an input mask for that because it's just 2 letters. City, no input mask, and Office ID doesn't need an input mask either. And where it's a number, it doesn't even have that option. Okay, so that's the input mask. Let's look at captions. We won't really go too much into captions, but just know this. The caption is basically an alternative name or label for the field when you use it in a view. So, for instance, if we add a label for this field, it's automatically going to call it phone. But if we wanted it to say office phone, then we could change this caption here to office phone. And when we're creating a form, instead of showing up as phone, it's going to show up as office phone. Okay? So, but we won't do that for now, but just so you know what the caption is. Okay, so that's your format, input mask, and caption. Next, we'll look at default value, validation rules, and validation text.